So what is it that makes a spiritual group truly life-changing? It's usually not the huge, flashy services, right? It's the small, dedicated gatherings. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of these, the Divine Mercy Cenacle. We're going to look at exactly how this type of faith group works and figure out why it's spread all over the world. All right, so here's our roadmap. We'll start with their really humble beginnings and then see what makes them so different from your typical prayer group. After that, we'll break down what actually happens in a meeting, see its power through a pretty incredible true story, and finally, look at how this whole thing is meant to become a way of life.
Okay, first up, where did this all come from? You might be surprised to learn that this global movement didn't start with some grand plan. Nope, it all started with one simple request in one small parish.
So, picture this. It's over 28 years ago, and a local pastor is setting up small groups to discuss the Sunday gospel. You know, pretty standard stuff. But one of these groups, well, they had a different idea.
Instead of the usual gospel reading, they asked if they could study the Diary of St. Faustina, which is this personal journal of a Polish non-spiritual life. And get this, they found it so fascinating that when they finished the whole book, they just started it over from the beginning. That simple little change, that one request, was the spark that lit the fire for the entire Cenacle movement.
And you know, what's really interesting is that this very modern idea actually echoes a vision from way back in 1910. Blessed George Matulaitis wrote about the incredible potential of organized groups of laypeople, regular church members, not priests or nuns. He believed they could bring faith into places we priests could not even approach. It's like he saw the spirit of the Cenacle coming 100 years early.
So what really makes a Cenacle different from just any other prayer group? I mean, on the surface, they might look similar, but the key is in what they focus on. It's a pretty unique approach.
So here's the official definition. A Cenacle is a small group that studies 3 specific texts: St. Faustina's Diary, the Bible, and the Catechism, which is kind of the handbook of Catholic beliefs. But the most important part isn't just the studying, it's that last phrase, a focus on faith sharing. And this right here, this is the real game changer. A lot of prayer groups are focused on supplication, praying for things, for needs. A Cenacle, though, is built around faith sharing. It's a conversation where members talk about how the readings actually connect to their real, everyday lives. That shared reflection, that's the engine that drives the whole thing. Okay, so we know what they are, but what does a meeting actually look like? What happens when people get together? Let's walk through the anatomy of a typical 2-hour gathering. The format is incredibly intentional. It's all designed to create a certain atmosphere. It starts with a song, and then, and this is important, it's followed by prayers of pure gratitude. For 5 minutes, it's all about thanking God, not asking for anything. This really sets a positive, open tone for the main event. A good 30 to 45 minutes of faith sharing before they wrap it all up with closing prayers. And here's something crucial. The person leading the group isn't a teacher. They're a facilitator. Their job isn't to give a lecture, it's to guide the conversation. Think of them as a good host at a dinner party, making sure everyone gets a chance to speak, drawing out the quieter members, and gently making sure no one person dominates the whole discussion. And to make sure that dynamic really works, there's a hard cap on the group size, 12 members. It's kind of the magic number. Any larger than that, and there just isn't enough time in the meeting for every single person to share in a meaningful way.
Okay. So why does all this structure and faith-sharing stuff actually matter? Because it can have a profound real-world impact. Let's look at the power of this model through one absolutely incredible story from the movement's early days.
This is where the rubber really meets the road. What actually happens when a spiritual lesson on a topic like forgiveness isn't just something you read about, but something you discuss and internalize with a group of people you trust? Well, one member found out in the most dramatic way imaginable. So there is a member named Teresa. She had just spent her last meeting studying and sharing about forgiveness. Just days later, she gets word that her terminally ill ex-husband, who she hadn't spoken to in 20 years because of a bitter divorce, wanted to see her. They met that Friday. And yeah, it was tense at first, but they eventually broke down, cried, and reconciled. The very next day, her ex-husband, who had been away from the church for 2 decades, called a priest and received last rites. He passed away peacefully on Sunday. That lesson on forgiveness directly paved the way for peace at the very end of his life. I mean, wow. Teresa's story is just such a powerful real-world example of this core teaching from St. Faustina's Diary. We resemble God most when we forgive our neighbors. It shows a spiritual lesson jumping right off the page and turning into life-changing action.
And that leads us to the ultimate goal of all of this. It's about turning a devotion into an actual lifestyle. The whole point of a cenacle isn't just what happens in that 2-hour meeting. It's about what happens in all the other hours of the week.
The idea is to build a life around these pillars. It means moving from just discussing forgiveness to actively practicing it. It's about turning big concepts like mercy and humility into small, daily actions, especially in how you treat other people. When you boil it all down, it's about closing that gap between knowing and doing. The goal isn't just to learn about the message, but to actually become the message in your relationships with your family, your coworkers, and your neighbors. And this leaves us with one final big thought. In a world where so many of us feel more and more disconnected and isolated, what is the role of an intentional, structured spiritual community? You have to wonder, maybe the need for these small, dedicated groups is more relevant and more urgent right now than it's ever been.